Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, we are previewing the May budget revision. It's scheduled to come out Friday. We've got the legendary John Gray on the show today to give us his predictions on what you can expect.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it's a couple of minutes after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazwata, ACSA's Executive Director. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We're honored to have you with us today. Go ahead and jump onto the chat and say hello and let us know where you're watching from today. Edgar, on assignment, if you will.
Not at Dodger Stadium. There is a day game at Dodger Stadium, but I am not there.
You are not there. Yes.
I'm in beautiful Sacramento and at the Hilton Arden West here. I know where we have some of our members. First day of our ACSA governance meetings, and I know we have some of our members right next door who just had a chance to kick off our proceedings, who are doing some of their leadership training here today before we jump into our leadership assembly and then our board meeting the following day. So a little bit of double duty here, but, making it work. Appreciate it. I know there's a lot of people in that other room, Naj, who are a little bummed that they can't be on. But right. I think some of them may not be paying attention because I see actually some of them in the comments here. So I will not tell on them.
Here's my question. Did anybody actually see you walk into the room that you're in now? Because if they did, and they're currently watching, I'm going to be interested to see if the door to that room that you're in just happens to open up and one of them comes and pops in behind you.
I was trying to be stealth, but I don't know. Some folks may force their first appearance here on the legislative lunch break.
That's correct. That's correct. Sheldon Smith first on with us today. I know Neri Pais, who's in Sacramento there as well. Mark Campbell, great superintendent in Calaveras Unified. He's looking forward to uplifting information on the May revise. We've got John Gray in from School Services of California to give us some of his predictions, what he's seeing as we move towards the budget revision, the May revision. It is now, according to a news release, coming out Friday at 11 a.m., which gives us, Edgar, an opportunity to promote that we'll be live at 2 o'clock on Friday with our special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Edgar and I, along with Yvonne Carrillo, the Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations for ACSA, and Megan Baer, our legislative advocate and budget expert, they will be on with us at 2 o'clock right here, ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Want to hit a couple of news headlines just right off the top, Edgar. This one coming in from LA Unified, which passed a board resolution Tuesday calling for the creation of a revamped master plan for English learners that could go into effect in the 25-26 calendar year. Now, this resolution outlines rules for the superintendent to assess the need for multi-language learners and their families and look for places where support is needed. Now, that includes creating access to an academic portfolio that includes A through G requirements, arts, as well as enrichment opportunities, extracurricular activities, technology, and social emotional resources. Several unique groups, Edgar, fall into this multi-language learners class, including potential long-term English learners with disabilities, and those who are refugees. A progress report on that resolution set to be submitted to the board in 120 days. Also, just want to get your reaction to this. Our friends at EdSource just publishing this this morning that the Office of Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Education informed Berkeley Unified on Tuesday that it will investigate charges that the district has failed to respond properly to rising incidents of anti-Semitism in its schools. That has meant that Berkeley Unified Superintendent Anika Ford Morthel, she has acknowledged receiving the notification letter during a visit to Capitol Hill on Wednesday, during which she said the district investigated 9 formal complaints by parents of anti-Semitism against students. Edgar, there's been so much in the headlines over the past months, if you will, about anti-Semitism here in this country. To have a superintendent from our state have to go to Capitol Hill to testify on behalf of this subject matter, certainly impactful here on a Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, this is big news. I mean, I know that I was trying to keep an eye on those hearings early this morning. I know there's some coverage even in the New York Times about this. I mean, I think this is something we've been talking to our leaders. Unfortunately, like, what a complicated situation that now our school leaders find themselves, right? Like, this is really what oftentimes our folks, whether it be at the district, at the site level, being put in a position to try to make sense of the very complicated world that we live in, right? That everybody is grappling with. And I think if anything is to be learned from what's happening on our college campuses, and I know that's been getting a lot of headlines over the last couple of weeks, one of the things that we've been telling our folks is that they do just need to be prepared that the spotlight can come now to our high schools or to our even just our school districts in general. And I think with the proceedings happening in Washington, D.C., we're obviously keeping a very close tab on that. That's of all the other things that our leaders now have to handle, this is yet another layer on.
Yeah.
So we're keeping a real close eye on that, Naj.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, you are right. It's one more thing for our education leaders, for our great members, to have to confront another challenge. Also want to make note of something. We get so many questions about artificial intelligence and resources for our education leaders and for our educators that are in the classroom. We've got a robust section on AI on the ACSA Resource Hub. In fact, we have just included a new piece from our friends over at F3 titled Administrative Foundational Questions for Using Generative AI Tools. You can access that and all of the great resources we have on AI at content.axa.org, or you can go to our website, axa.org, click that little hamburger menu on the left, and that will take you to our ACSA Resource Hub. Okay, Edgar, budget week, May revision week. You know, it's one of my favorite weeks, and because it's one of my favorite weeks, we decided we're going to bring the expert on to talk specifically about the May budget revision. John Gray, President and CEO of School Services of California. You all know him very well. John, it's great to have you here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. I just want to quickly go back to January when the governor released his initial budget proposal. What concerns did you have when you looked at that budget proposal as we moved through this 5-month period between when it came out and where we're at right now?
Well, first of all, I'd like a copy of this recording where you introduced me as legendary. I'm going to send it to all 3 of my children.
There you go.
And not only that, like, I keep reading the comments. I was like, did John... I mean, he stacked it. There's all kinds of praise. I mean, we're the John Gray fan club there. So.
Seriously,
yeah, and thank you very much for revising that picture from 1979.
Yeah, Edgar, it's almost like you and I are guests on this show today.
Here we go.
All right, let's test him. Let's make sure he comes with some good stuff here.
Okay, well, for us, what raised most of our concerns, obviously, not obviously, were a lot of the revenue assumptions used in the budget. We felt that they were a bit optimistic, far more optimistic than the LAO at the time. And when we do our governor's budget workshop, we always talk about what are the risks to the budget. And that was probably our biggest issue, are the revenue assumptions. And so we're going to get new revenue assumptions on Friday. And again, the view in the rear view mirror is pretty clear. We know what the revenues are, but what are some of those assumptions used in the May revise? So the risk of the revenue assumptions, and then we got a brand new solution on how they were going to balance the budget, how they were going to handle Prop 98. And they created a brand new, we call it Test 4. Used to have 3 tests, now it's 4 tests. A way to hold schools, let's call it, held harmless for the revenues they already received and actually not provide cuts to schools, at least in the governor's budget. And so anytime they manipulate Prop 98, obviously ACSA's first and forefront that goes out and, basically fights for the integrity of Prop 98. But anytime they mess with it, it is a concern. And it's been a while since they've messed with it. During recessions, they do it all the time. So I guess to answer your question, Naj, I think the revenue assumptions included in January and their solution, it's something brand new that's not in line with the Constitution. So those were the two things that concerned us.
John, not only all our members there are fans, but obviously we're fans of John Gray and all the work that you do at School Services. So we just appreciate your partnership and always be there to support our folks in any way they can. So I know you're on the road a lot, and you're traveling around talking to state education leaders. Oftentimes we happen to be in the same spot there, sharing panels or just being with the same audience. So I'm going to ask you a question that I already really know the answer to, because I often just steal whatever you say and just try to sound smart myself. But when you've been talking to our leaders, especially about the budget, what topic has been at the forefront? What would you say are the themes that are coming up as we're thinking about this budget or given the concerns?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And as you know, Edgar, I do a lot of collective bargaining type work. And so obviously that's an issue, but probably the bigger issue is, I have superintendents that flat out tell me that the pandemic saved them financially, right? They were declining enrollment, tight budgets, and then, not that anyone would wish what we had to go through, but all that influx of funds during COVID, all that sort of thing, it was pretty significant. And now we're coming out of that period. And so a lot of districts, the declining enrollment relief for the 3-year rolling average, it's helpful, but we're losing the hold harmless year. And so a lot of districts are looking at their multi-year projections and really seeing significant deficits. What's saving us right now is most districts are sitting on probably the largest fund balances they've ever had in their history. It's amazing what happens when you close down schools and you get all the federal money and you can do all sorts of things. And so they're not in dire circumstances. And most will say, I can get through next year. It's that next year that really concerns me. So we look at data all the time at School Services. We collect the statewide data. And one of the trends that I've noted is we kind of took a break during the pandemic of managing staff. And what I mean by that, and it's not being critical. You're not going to lay off a bunch of people during the pandemic, especially when you get all this money to keep them employed. But during the pandemic, the ADA yield, everything, a lot of districts are a lot smaller than they were before the pandemic, and yet they have maybe even more staff than they did entering into it. So most districts, if they staff like they did prior to the pandemic, and they staff like that now, severely overstaffed. And I think it's unfortunate that, I don't think that you hear layoffs this year. I think next year is going to be a bigger year for that. And that concerns me. The last time we went through something like this, the last recession, we laid off 50,000 teachers and we never brought them back, right? And sent the message to young people that, hey, teaching might be a risky profession. I hope it doesn't come to that. But the concern is they can make it through their 3-year, but that deficit leading into the 3rd year is very concerning. And I don't see any signs of relief as far as money coming in from the state or federal government to help them through that. So I think that's top of mind.
Folks, if you have questions for John Gray, go ahead and put those into the chat. We'll try and tackle some of those at the end. John, I was just listening to what you were saying there in that response to Edgar's question, that districts are at least telling you that they're not in the dire circumstances. They're not so worried about this year, but they are worried about next. I will ask, though, that as the budget comes out, we're not in that kind of doomsday kind of situation that was being predicted maybe by the LAO earlier in the year. But as we've moved through this and in those discussions, you just said it, it's not a dire circumstance right now for districts because they have money, but it's next year that they have to worry about. What is that one thing maybe that they're telling you is their biggest concern moving forward?
Yeah, their biggest concern moving forward is maintaining their best people. And my observation from the last big recession, the superintendents that were the most successful really, looked out for their districts. When the problem comes at you and the cuts are dire, things like you have to act, and everyone did act. But the ones that really came out of it strong were those that, okay, I'm doing tactical stuff now, but I'm keeping my eyes up here, and I'm going to look at what does it look like when things get better, because it will get better, right? We tend to say point B, point A, whatever that trajectory that we're going to do that forever. No, we go like this in the state of California, and so they want to keep their best staff. They want to keep their best programs. And so some superintendents are actually looking at it as an opportunity. We've been in the LCFF for over 10 years, and things that we thought would work 10 years ago, maybe they're not working as much. And maybe it's a time to look at programs and have funnel money to things that are working, and maybe stop doing some of the things that might be popular but aren't really moving the needle. And so keeping their best people going forward. I mean, districts spend a ton of money trying to attract and retain great teachers, and the thought of all of that kind of going to the wayside, I think that's the biggest point of angst for most districts that I'm dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
John, you mentioned, you alluded to this whole notion of like kicking the can down the road, right? And it was actually something I was going to ask. So I'm curious about your perspectives. You kind of talked about it from the local piece, and you could reiterate that, just the positives, maybe the negatives, especially knowing what may be coming next year, as you said, in terms of layoffs and the financial picture. And the state, obviously, I think we talked a lot about this politically, about the will for them to make tough decisions or hoping that maybe the situation gets better. What are like some pros and cons just in terms of that strategy on both ends?
Yeah, so the whole kicking the can down the road, we've seen that a lot at districts and at the state. And sometimes I'll be candid, it can work, and you look really smart, right? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, things will get better. You kick down the can down the road, and you hope and pray, and then for whatever reason, your wishes come true. But in my experience, that's very risky, and you can get all kinds of, well, we didn't cut anything, and we got through. And so I look at it a little different for districts and the state. The state, I want the state to be straight shooters. Typically, if you mask over a problem by either different assumptions or gimmicks, that really doesn't solve the problem. It puts it off into a following year, and that's how districts get in trouble, right? Most districts don't stroll into bankruptcy or insolvency. They drop like a rock. And it's usually pent up, not making the hard decisions, and that accumulates over time to the point where it's almost unrecoverable. So, I'd rather the state just be straight up and say this is what it is, and let's move forward. It might not feel that way if you're at a district. I'm actually going to have a cut. But my fear is when you kick the can down the road, and if things don't get better and the economics aren't looking better to me, at least what I'm looking at, does that exacerbate the problem? Does it make it much bigger of a problem till next year? And I understand why the state might kick things down the road. There's a very important election in November. Maybe they'll make the tough decisions after that. But as I got to confess, it does work sometimes, but you're rolling the dice.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, I see that Helio asked a couple questions here. I'll just get your thoughts on one of them. I know your team has been tracking this or just kind of getting a pulse of what's happening in the Capitol. But given that the May revise is coming out And I know we get questions about bigger reforms or initiatives that may address as he put it, long-standing disparities, such as funding gaps between affluent and low-income districts. Given the revenue situation, I mean, kind of what's your thought of opportunities to make any adjustments in this environment?
Yeah, I don't see. That's a good question, but in this environment, I don't see that happening. You usually don't get significant positive reforms during tight budget times. That typically happens when there's money, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't still advocate for it. Edgar can tell you better than I can, the legislative process, it takes a while to get meaningful reforms. And the fact that they don't have money to fix things right now shouldn't stop your advocacy. That's when you educate them. And then when money comes back, there's a better opportunity. But I don't foresee any of that in this May revise or this budget.
There's a question, John, that came in from Rob Mangawala. I'm sorry, Rob, if I mispronounced your name. And
be nice to Rob. He's the CBO in the district where my daughter works.
So okay.
Be nice to him.
I will be nice. Rob, if I mispronounced your last name, it's John Gray's fault. He asked this question: how about changing the 3-year average ADA calculation for LCFF to a 5-year average ADA? It kind of leads me to this question, John. Are there mechanisms out there that might change the way things are measured or calculated that may support school districts, especially kind of in a short-term fashion?
Yeah, that's a good add-on, Naj. I'm glad you asked that. And Rob, I don't think there's any chance of that. I like it. I love it. I would love a 5-year average. Getting the 3-year average was really big for us. You can thank Mike Fine for that. He convinced them. But I like the idea, Rob. I'm not optimistic of that. So if you go back in time and look at what happened last time we had any meaningful or significant cuts, the state always tries to give you tools to help you get through this tough time. Some of them are very helpful and some are not very helpful. So if you look back at the last time, they did things like relaxing the strings on categorical funds, right? They said, well, you can keep these categorical funds, but you don't have to use them for restricted purposes. You can use them to help buoy your unrestricted general fund. They shortened the instructional year from 180 days to 175 days, where you could reduce the number of days kids went to school to save money. To me, that wasn't very helpful because you had to negotiate that, and really that had a direct impact on students that wasn't positive. They lowered the reserve requirements, so you could have half of what if you're a 3% district, you could go down to 1.5%, things like that. But they also gave us various other tools, like instead of having significant cuts, they did cash deferrals, things like that, that helped get us through. So if it's not in this May revise, if ultimately we do have cuts, I would expect some tools to help districts get through that.
John, I'll throw out another question. I'm afraid we're going to just disappoint Helio because we're going to be Debbie Downers right here, right? We're not giving any real positive information, but he does ask.
It's coming out on Friday. That's a good thing.
Right. Come back on Friday for even better. What role do you see the federal government playing in mitigating the impact for the budget shortfall? I mean, I think I'll help answer that. I don't see that they're, given what's going on in DC, that it's hard to believe that they're going to help, especially California, right?
Right.
Now, maybe I'll shift that question a little bit. Given this interaction with federal funds, I know this is a lot of the work that you folks at School Services have been doing. Kind of what recommendations have you been giving the field, given as folks are going into this period where the federal funds are expiring? Yeah,
so it's interesting. I would say about half the districts that I'm looking at, they're being very proactive. So if they built things, they're done, right? They built shade structures, whatever, they have those. For those that hired people through that, there are districts that are flat out saying, okay, the funding's over, and so it's time to go. But I'm also seeing a lot of districts that are saying, well, we don't want to get rid of all these people. What happens though is you got to find a spot for them. And that spot typically is in your unrestricted general fund. And so I've gotten a lot of pushback from the California Teachers Association when we go to the bargaining table and say, yes, the COLA is 8.22 and we got 6% new revenue, but we can't do anything. We got to do a zero. And the reason is we're going to keep all these people we hired with one-time money and then fund them out of ongoing money. That doesn't really go over very well, especially with the teachers union. And so, I don't see a way, if you funded all those people out of one-time money, you might be able to keep them from a year, but you're probably just delaying the inevitable. And, the funds are gone. If you want to keep those positions, make them permanent positions and part of your planning. Don't just keep them afloat. And what are they doing? They did different things in the pandemic than maybe you need them to do now, and make sure that's all aligned. That you're just not. And to be candid, in a lot of communities, like where I'm from the Central Valley, a lot of those communities, local boards are very fond of classified employees because that's who live in the community and that's who votes and that who goes to the schools. And they're very reluctant. They bring them on and they're just very reluctant to let them go. But the finances probably don't justify keeping them all.
Let me put a couple of questions here together, John, as we wrap up. Helio asked the question, what are some potential areas within the ed budget that might see cuts or reallocations, and how might these impact schools and students across California? And then we had another one, this one from David Mack. John, if you were a betting man, what categoricals do you see getting cut, if any? All right, so he may not be a betting man. David is not a betting man. John, you may not be a betting man, but what's your prediction for what we're going to see at the end of this week? Draining the rainy day account, cuts, deferrals, money for COLA. What is your great prediction now?
Well, I'm going on a limb here, and if I'm wrong, you can't replay this afterwards and highlight how wrong it was. So a couple of things. The COLA went up. It's 1.07 instead of 0.78, I think it was. That's going to cost about $250 million to actually fund the COLA above and beyond January. And I think he's going to pay for that out of one-time money. I think he's going to fund the COLA of 1.07, probably pay for it out of the green buses, which are very popular up in El Dorado County. But again, those are one-time monies. But I do think they're going to fund the COLA, even though they probably the money doesn't support that. I think the November election is part of that. So I think they probably cut the green buses. They fund the COLA. The other categoricals, those are Governor Newsom's babies. I don't see him cutting those yet. I think down the road, if it gets bad, I think those are fair game. So I know how popular ELOP is in your communities. And so I don't see those cut. I do think we could have cash deferrals as one of the mechanisms. Yeah, he could draw down a little more on the rainy day account. He could take his $8 billion solution and make it a bigger one. But I think we could actually get cash deferrals. And the rationale is going to be, they look at your fund balances, so they know you have cash, right? And so that shouldn't concern you, right? We'll just do a couple of cash deferrals. And that's probably correct. However, you're all sitting there with those giant deficits spending down those cash balances. So the concern would be, if this isn't a one-year blip, which I don't think it is, once they start those deferrals, how long are they going to go? So I'll sum it up by saying I think they'll fund the COLA. I think they'll probably drain the green buses, possibility of deferrals. But a lot will be told in those revenue projections, right? not the rear view mirror, but the projections that the governor uses. And so if those appear too rosy, we always sound the alarm, and I know ACSA does too. But that's what I expect. I'm wrong for sure, but hopefully I'm approximately right.
Okay, so I just want to make sure when we go back and replay this show,
legendary, remember legendary
John Gray.
We should have actually. We need to do that a year from now. That's where the show should start.
That's exactly yes. So John says we will fund the COLA, we will cut the green buses, which you said are very popular in El Dorado County.
Yes.
No categorical cuts and some cash deferrals. I've got these written down, Edgar. So we'll see how that goes. I do have to ask John one question. Did you get a new computer?
No, I didn't. I know I appear taller, but that's because I adjusted my camera.
Is it? I mean, Edgar, is it just me, or is that like the most crisp shot that we've had here on this show in some time?
What you don't know is he had his whole team in there before he was on camera, making sure he looked perfect. He's just trying to be humble.
Yeah, I just got done with makeup right before I came on.
Perfect. All right, John Gray, President and CEO of School Services of California. John, great to have you here on the show. We look forward to having you next time.
Anytime. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Edgar, this gives me an opportunity once again before I have you just kind of comment a little bit on what John had to say. We will be live on the air with our special edition of the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break coming your way Friday, 2 p.m. I got to get my words right today. Friday, 2 p.m. here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. We will go through the entire May revision. Our guests, Yvonne Carrillo and Megan Baer from our ACSA Governmental Relations Department, they'll be here. They're going to be working all morning on this budget, which is supposed to come out around 11 o'clock. So we'll be live on the air 2 p.m. Friday with our special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Edgar, your thoughts on what John had to say? I'm making sure that I wrote down all of his predictions so we can come back next year and see how he did.
Yeah, I mean, John, and what John said, obviously our teams work real closely together. And I think just in talking to Megan and Yvonne and other folks in our team that are in the Capitol day by day, I mean, it's kind of spot on in terms of what the rumbling is, right? The one, I know I saw a comment there about community schools. I probably would add that to the list. I think it was Darren who pointed out that especially those unexpended, those unallocated grants across the board, that may be another area they look to. I will say this will be whatever comes out on Friday may not be the last word. Remember, this is a process. May revise comes out. It's the governor's take. The legislature will have their own perspective. Then we're going to get into this negotiation phase. But I do think that what happens here between May revise and the adoption of the final budget, there could be further modifications. So that I think it's going to be a busy budget season. Maybe not for the best reasons.
Right.
But I think there's going to be a lot of activity there.
We've noticed that there are a number of guests who are brand new to our show. So if you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to join us here Wednesdays by subscribing and liking us. If you subscribe to us on YouTube or like us on Facebook, you'll get instant alerts when we're about to come on with breaking news, like our special edition on Friday. And then you also get a reminder when we're coming on the air for our normal Wednesday show. And of course, if you have great stories happening in your school district, we want to tell those stories as well. Go ahead and send your talking points, your photos, your bullet points to our great EdCal editor, Michelle Carl at mcarl@acsa.org.
Hey, Naj, I forgot to tell you, you know how I love to pass along some of the feedback we get from our members. And this was one of my favorites in the last week, that somebody came up to me at one of our events.
Right.
And said, you guys do a good job of making really boring stuff sound interesting. That does not apply, I guarantee, to anything that John said. Then none of that was boring, right? I meant to mention that to you, but there you go. I'm giving you the compliment of the day. Boring stuff sound interesting. We'll see how they feel about that on Friday when we'll see what information we have.
You know what? People may not be so kind when we come on the air on Friday and talk about what's happening with the budget, but some great comments. So thank you so much for bringing that. Yes, we are way past the bottom of the hour. Folks, thanks so much for joining us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are on Wednesdays here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. And on this Friday, 2 p.m., with our special budget coverage. Again, that comes your way 2 p.m. here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you Friday.